I'm Michael Bungay Stanya. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather, the BS, and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you are a transformational leader and you are seeking to just do things and get what you want out of life, well, then this is the right podcast for you. One of the things that this whole podcast series has really got me thinking about is agency. I mean, you probably noticed that I badger almost every guest to give me their take on it. And I'm interested in agency for myself. Like, how do I encourage myself to actually feel like I have permission to do the things and to be resilient as I do those things? But also agency for others. How do I invite others in so they have agency and they feel the same? I think it's right at the heart of our transformational work. Now, Cate Hall has a point of view on this. Cate's been a lawyer, a professional poker player, a drug addict, a biotech founder, and a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar private biotech foundation. So that's a lot. A little while ago, she wrote an essay that really seized the imagination of a lot of people called How to Be More Agentic. And as a result of that essay, she's now an author. Her book, You Can Just Do Things, How High Agency People Get What They Want Out of Life, is out anytime now. This is going to be a great conversation. Cate, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So if you were teaching me, coaching me on how to start building agency, first of all, let's define what we're even talking about. What is agency in your words, Cate?
My working definition of agency is twofold. So it's a capacity to both see and act on degrees of freedom that other people overlook. So it's like noticing that you have more freedom than the default menu that you start out with, and then practicing the courage that is necessary to act on some of those options too.
Okay, so let's start with, I'm going to say in my language, you're noticing that you have more choices than you might realize. You have more capacity to act. How do I heighten my capacity to notice?
Yeah, I think that some part of this is learning to see yourself and the world more clearly. And one of my big tips for that is just like increasing the bandwidth of feedback that you're getting from the world through both like anonymous and direct sources. And then there's this thing that I just think about as like admitting that you know the question, which is we all sort of like strategically obscure from ourselves certain questions about the way that we're living, our choices. And I think you can sort of pretty systematically sit down and make guesses about what those things are and then dig into what your options are.
Can you give me an example of one or two of those questions?
Yeah. So stuff like, what values do you publicly espouse, but you actually violate in private? If you could go back to college and redo your life, would you choose the job or friends or partner that you currently have?
Right.
What would you be doing with your time if nobody could sort of watch you do it? So it's a lot of allocation questions.
Right. And I mean, it's one thing to kind of sit with these questions, but does there need to be a catalyst that is a moment that kind of nudges you to that? Because there's a lot of people I know, and I might include myself in this at times in my life, where I'm like, I'm not even going to get to the step of sitting with these annoyingly challenging questions that you're laying down for me.
Yeah, so I think that there is this precursor step. There are other ways of getting this push, and the problem is that they are generally accessible, but almost random in how they occur to you. So examples of this are a lot of my initial push just came from working with people who are much higher in agency than me and seeing, oh, this person operates in a totally different way from me. What should I, absorb from that? Another one that I've benefited from is desperation. So I've written quite a bit about recovering from drug addiction. And I think there's this concept in recovery of the gift of desperation, which is you get to a point of just being so sick of your life that you're really willing to take radical actions to change it.
That's interesting. I like how you're putting two different forces there, because desperation is kind of the push from behind. I don't want to go back there. And finding other role models, high agency people going, oh, I could maybe be like that, feels like a pull from the future, which is like, oh, you can kind of pull me towards that different way. So two different ways of being kind of pulled towards agency.
I like that. I like that.
Part of what it means to take on agency, I'm guessing, is a shift in identity. You're moving to a new way of doing, which also means a new way of being. What can you teach me around putting down some old clothing, masks, old forms of identity before I can step into something new? Is there anything you've learned about what it takes to do that? Because that is non-trivial, it feels.
So I think one of the things that I've found most helpful is you can think about identity as this set of stories that sort of keeps you held in place because it defines your self-concept. A way of sort of easing those restraints is to sort of engage in this role play type exercise that I like. And this is something that I did quite a bit when I was in addiction and recovery from addiction. And that is sort of temporarily adopting the mindset of I'm just already a completely different person. And so there's this frame that I like to use is the crisis manager mindset, which is like pretend that you are a completely different person who's just been dropped into your existing life.
Right.
You don't know the person who is like responsible for all of these terrible decisions that somebody has made. But you are responsible for figuring out like how to triage the situation.
Right.
And so you're just like, I'm not responsible for anything that's happened so far, but I'm responsible for the next thing. And just spend like 30, 60 minutes figuring out what is the next step available to me that will allow me to make progress on these goals. You can just sort of like wall that off from the rest of your life and then do it again the next day and the next day. And I found that to be surprisingly potent. It's like a little bit silly, but often things that work well for this kind of thing are kind of silly, I think.
I love it because it's effectively getting outside yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
You're still a champion for this person, but you're like, I'm not going to get entangled in the embarrassment and shame and confusion of how the hell you ended up in this place. You're just like, no, I'm going to bring my most competent version and my love for this person, and I'm going to help us figure this out together.
I like that way for me, yeah.
Part of what fuels your insight about agency, Cate, is your career as a poker player, a successful professional poker player. And of course, that means you've been making bets. And I know from reading your Substack, you've actually placed some bets in life beyond the poker table, some bets where you felt pretty good about it, and honestly, they didn't work out so well. Most notably, perhaps your first husband. Mm-hmm. And you actually contrast that with your current husband, where you weren't sure, but went for it anyway. Yeah. And actually, that seems to be working out pretty well. Congratulations, by the way. I'm just wondering, is this just the consequence of being agentic? You need to make choices, and therefore you have hits and you have misses?
I kind of think it is. And I think life is one big fat tail distribution where you just keep trying things. And it's like being a venture capitalist where most of your wins come from like one thing in the portfolio or, writing a book or publishing books where like you're really just looking for a big hit. Yeah. I think that approach to life of just, I'm going to keep trying and I'm going to keep trying a lot of different things. It pays off eventually. And hopefully it pays off on your first marriage, but if not, the second one.
Right. My wife is on her second marriage and that's paying off just fine for her. I'm on my first and that's paying off just fine for me as well. So, it can go either way.
Nice.
There are some contexts where that approach that, look, I'm going to take risks, I'm going to stack up some mistakes and some stumbles and scars, but if I get the occasional win, that's respected. I also know that in some organizations, if you're trying to lead change and you're like, look, I'm going to make a whole ton of mistakes, I'll get something right and it'll be a hit eventually, it feels like a career-limiting move. Is there a way of navigating this if you're in a context which isn't quite so attuned to going, we're playing a portfolio here and we know we'll have some losses and we'll have a couple of wins?
It's a really interesting question because it just reveals to me how much I have selected for this quality in my professional opportunities without even intending to. Because obviously like being a poker player, being a startup founder, like these really do fit that pattern of experiment a lot and figure out what works. And I have never worked in an organization other than a law firm. I was very junior, where experimenting and iterating was not the right path forward.
Yeah.
But if I try to think about like, okay, imagine I'm in a role like the COO of a large organization and I have compliance concerns, I have tax concerns, I have things that I can't mess up.
Right.
How would I approach that? I think you can just like look for domains in which you can be selectively agentic. Like there will be some areas where you can experiment and iterate, and sort of instilling that as a way of operating seems good to me. And then increasing the agency of the people who work for you.
One of the challenges I think that happens in trying to increase the agency of those around you is loss of control, loss of status in some ways, because you're like, look, I am empowering you, to use a slightly old-fashioned word, which really means I'm giving up some of my power so that you can use it. Do you have any guidance on how I manage my anxiety around, oh my God, I've got all these agentic people around me and they're all doing stuff and I'm not even sure what they're all doing and I'm not sure what's happening anymore?
Yeah. So one of the pieces of advice that I have tried to apply in both my relationship with my husband and my work relationships is if you want somebody to do something themselves, you have to get comfortable with the concept of them doing it badly. And that was like one of the hardest things for me to accept when I was starting to try to encourage agency in people who worked for me, was just they make all sorts of decisions that I don't agree with. And you really have to pick your battles about which ones are even things that you should correct them on, because there's like a correct way of doing it versus a matter of taste. Which ones like rise to that level versus what should you just let them run with and mess up because it's low cost, reversible, and just building the muscle of agency is more important.
Yeah.
I think there's another question that is like, well, what if I want to retain control and and I don't want people to be more agentic? I think everything in my professional life, which is, limited but real, points to the fact that increasing agency in the people around you is just good for everybody. It makes them better at their jobs. It makes them enjoy their jobs more. It frees up your time to do other stuff that is higher leveraged. So you're not just managing and micromanaging people all the time. And so it really is a win-win. And I think you can just sort of like work on the part of yourself that wants to keep everything in a tight fist, and invite more fluidity into the organization. And over time, that becomes a much better equilibrium to be in.
To find Cate, head to catehall.com. That's Cate with a C. It's got links to her Substack and to her book and to everything else. And as a reminder, her new book is You Can Just Do Things, How High Agency People Get What They Want Out of Life. Is there a dark side to agency?
I love that question. Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the things that is really interesting to me in all of the agency discourse, which is, there's a lot of it right now, is like, it's almost never the people that you like and are rooting for them to succeed who talk about agency. It's like, I have mixed feelings about the title of my book, actually, You Can Just Do Things, because it is sort of like a little bit of a narcissist rallying cry, I think.
Right.
And if you try to think about the worst people that you know, they're probably highly agentic people.
Right.
And so I've had to sort of dig into why does that happen? And I think it's because there is a natural relationship between agency and dark triad traits. The relationship is basically people who are high in dark triad traits are not very concerned with social scripts.
So before you go on, tell me what the dark triad traits are.
Oh, yeah. Those are sociopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. It's like a specific set of 3 traits that psychologists talk about a lot.
Okay,
and it's kind of like the things that you don't want in leaders or friends or anything.
Yeah.
The people who are high in these traits, they tend to be a lot less concerned about like, what is the socially proper thing to do? What are the rules that any rule-abiding citizen should follow? And so you see this correlation between people who have those traits and agency. And a lot of those people, end up doing stuff in the world because that's sort of like an unhobbling of their ability to operate.
Right.
I think agency is not the problem. It is more of a correlation than a causation thing. So part of what I think about with this book is like the dedication of the book is to the best who lack conviction, which comes from the
Yeats poem.
Second Coming. Exactly. And so it's like, the worst are full of passion and intensity and the best lack all conviction.
I love that line.
It's hopefully a book for people who are pro-social, who want to make good things happen in the world, but who, because they are rule following, because they have been really like socialized into particular structures, they don't see all of the degrees of freedom that one can take in ways that are non-self-serving and non-self-interested. But they need a little bit more of a push to unlock those degrees of freedom.
Yeah, so if you're a rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem, do not pick up Cate's book. This is not for you.
Exactly. You already know what's in it. You don't need it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of people who are wreaking havoc, who are full of agency right now, and we kind of wish they were less so. How do I stay attuned to that in myself? In this hunger to be more agentic, assuming that I see myself as a fundamentally decent person. How do I not overreach? How do I not create boundaries that are unreasonable? How do I not become entitled? Is there a way of being both attuned so it's not just me, but also we?
Yeah. So I think this is the type of question that I get a lot from people who are well motivated. And I think the core response is actually identity change is so challenging. It's so hard to implement that almost nobody needs to worry about overshooting that optimal point and just like becoming a wildly different person with wildly different priorities without noticing that that's happening and throwing on the brakes. And I think it can be hard to appreciate how true that is because we see these like sociopathic high agency people out in the world and we don't want to become like them. But my husband, who is like a coach, has an overall way of viewing the world that's like, there are basically opposite sets of advice that apply for different groups of people on all sorts of dimensions. And wherever you are, the goal is to sort of reverse your natural bias.
Yeah, I love that.
And that just moves you closer to center rather than like switching you into the other category of person.
Yeah, I use something similar. I think that's a wonderful way of framing it, which is, it's a spectrum. What's your bias on the spectrum, and how might you want to counterbalance that at times so that it's not your only way of showing up and playing?
Yeah, totally.
What haven't we talked about yet? What needs to be said that hasn't yet been said?
I guess like one concept that I would highlight that we haven't really talked about too much yet is the concept of selective agency, which is kind of like a through line through the whole book, which is basically the idea that people are not generally high agency or low agency in a global sense. They're more selective about where they apply agency.
Got it.
And so the person who shows up at work and seems low agency might be super high agency in their personal life, in their relationships. And a lot of that difference has to do with the circumstances in which they're operating. And so there can be a temptation sometimes when we encounter low agency people to write them off when they are instead like a product of particular historical factors, particular circumstances in the domain in which you're encountering them, and then this like background spikiness that all humans have. And people are actually like quite capable of change on the agency dimension, I think, if you give them credit for that.
I love that we finish with this because I know that I am fast to judge people as being non-agentic in a way that kind of condemns them as being ever thus. It does feel more generous and more optimistic and more human if I think to myself, look, everybody's got capacity to embrace agency. Thanks for your support of the pod. As you most likely know, the most generous act you can do to support me and Change Signal is to recommend an episode to a colleague or a friend. Pick your favorite episode, tell somebody that they should listen to it. That would be marvelous. We do grow best by word of mouth. There's more at thechangesignal.com. Thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.